I really am. And this is day 7 of your conditioning, because you're going to go to some presentations in the future, and I guarantee you that the person who's giving that presentation is not going to show you a video. And you're going to kind of disconnect, and most of you will probably walk out wondering, what happened? But we'll always show a video. Okay.
I want to see Star Wars, Pixar, Marvel, everything Disney.
I mean, you can't beat this.
Stopping time with the world.
There's so many Disney things here that you wouldn't find anywhere else.
It's going to be legendary. I don't think today could get any better.
I'm having a blast. I'm on fire.
If you're a true Disney fan, you have to be here.
It's so great to see all of the Disney characters coming together.
This is like the best experience of my life.
Excellent. Anybody been to D23? Yeah. It's hard to get a ticket, I'll tell you. Yesterday, we ran a little bit long, so I wanted to conclude that this morning. Most of you know that, as I mentioned earlier, when Walt Disney passed away, they locked his offices up and they were unoccupied. But his clerical support team continued to show every day. They went to the office. It remained locked. Nobody touched anything. Dave Smith was hired in 1970 and 71. They went in and they painfully documented everything and photographed every inch of that office, to such an extent that even the pencils in the pencil holder, if one pencil were this way and another were this way, or a pen were this way, it was put back exactly as it was the day that Walt Disney passed away. Very, very detailed. That office space in H5 has been used for a lot of different things over the years, including Michael Eisner's office for a number of years on one corner of the animation building. And a few years back, about 6 years ago, they decided that they would take all of those pieces and that they would go back into the original space, again. And if you went to the studios today and you walked up to that area once occupied by Walt Disney, it is exactly the same today as it was the day that he passed away. So I'll show you a little video here of a tour of that, and then we'll get into today's topic.
Ryan and Becky enter the lot's historic animation building, where Walt Disney's personal offices occupied Suite 3H from 1940 to 1966. Following Walt's passing, the offices were meticulously photographed and inventoried, down to the last paperclip, by Disney legend and Walt Disney Archives founder Dave Smith. While numerous executives and producers occupied and altered the space in the decades since, Becky and her team have now painstakingly restored the suite to its original form. The furnishings, accessories, and artifacts you're about to see are original, appearing exactly as they did when Walt passed away in December 1966. Welcome to the beating heart of the Walt Disney Studios. Welcome to Suite 3H.
So here we are.
You've got to be kidding me.
Pretty cool, huh?
I think I need a moment. It's unbelievable.
Thank you.
This is just, I always say that there are times in your career where you stop and you think, how did I get here? And as the kid who grew up, worshiping the guy who sat at that desk, and to be standing here, it's unbelievable.
I get that way every time I come in here, and I come in a lot.
crazy.
It's different seeing it behind glass, huh?
And seeing it in photos and on film, but there's just something about being in this room it's hard to describe. To think how that piano changed pop culture history is...
Exactly. In fact, one of the most interesting things is that when I brought Richard Sherman here the first time, he came in and had the reaction. He kind of stepped back and said, "Oh my gosh, this is like walking back in time." And what was really wonderful is that he walked immediately over to the piano, and the first thing he saw was the Annette Funicello music there. It was the Strumman song. And he says, "That's the first song I ever played on this piano." And he sat down and started playing it. And that is the piano that Richard sat down and played Feed the Birds. And he tells the story of how Walt would stand and look out the window while he played Feed the Birds on Friday evenings or late in the day. And Richard said that's it. He would sit down right there, play the piano, and Walt would look out the northern...
And Walt didn't even have to ask for the song. He could just say, "Play it."
Just say, "Play it," and Richard knew exactly what he meant. Let's come over and look at the desk. This is obviously the most important piece in the room, Walt Disney's desk, and the items that are on it were, originally there. I think one of the things that's really interesting to me about Walt Disney's offices in general, and specifically this little corner, is that you really get a feeling of how much he adored his daughters. You can see his miniatures and you see everything, but I mean, look at this. There's all these photographs. The baby shoes. Those are Diane and Sharon's baby shoes there on display, and his baby picture of Diane there, and the Norman Rockwell pictures of Diane and Sharon that were done for Walt. And you could just see throughout the whole office, how much his girls meant to him. There's photos, of course, over on the piano as well, and there's other photos in the working office.
Even the fact that someone like Norman Rockwell would draw pictures of your kids speaks to who Walt Disney was. And the miniatures was another fascination of his. He
did. He collected miniatures. He made miniatures. He collected them. He had a miniatures room in the other part of the suite. He had a room where he kept cabinets of miniatures, but he also had these. A lot of them he collected, but a good percentage of them, people found out that he collected miniatures, and so they would send him gifts. People would bring him a miniature, or they would send them to him for gifts. Most of them have nothing to do with Disney characters. You can see there's some glass Pluto and Mickey there, and Donald Duck and Tinkerbell and so forth, but most of them are not, they're not Disney miniatures. So there's a couple other really interesting pieces here on the desk. This piece right here is an award that was given to Walt. It was a thank you gift from the U.S. Coast Guard. Walt had worked on a film called Men Against the Arctic, which was a People and Places film in the 50s, and they gave him this bell as a thank you gift for doing it, and so he was very proud of that. He kept it here on his desk. And there's a funny story. Tommy Wilk, who was his secretary at the time, sat in the outer office there, and she said in an interview that Walt would often have meetings in this room, and it would get very, intense, and they would get focused, and they would be working away. And one of her main jobs was to make sure that Walt would take a break for lunch, because otherwise he wouldn't get anything to eat, and we didn't want Walt, grumpy in the afternoon. And so she would come in here and interrupt him when it came time for lunch, because he had to take his lunch. And she said that one time she came in here and there was this big meeting going on, and she kept trying to get Walt's attention, and he wouldn't listen, and he kept ignoring her. And finally she walked over to the bell and she grabbed it, she rang it as loud as she could, and everything stopped dead. She said, "It's time for lunch!" And fortunately, Walt thought that was funny and started laughing. And so he got so tickled by it that he told her that, "I want you to come in and ring that bell for lunch every single day." And so every day after that, she would come in and ring the bell when it was lunchtime. So that's the bell. So we didn't have that in our collection. That had gone back to the Walt Disney family after Walt's passing. And so the folks at the Family Museum were really gracious about loaning it to us to display on the desk, because it was such an important piece in this office. So we really appreciated that they loaned it to us. The other piece that everyone asks about, of course, is this Gulfstream jet model. This is the Grumman Gulfstream 2 jet. And this particular jet was on order. Walt had this jet on order, and it was going to be delivered, and sadly, when he passed away, Roy decided they didn't need another jet, and so he canceled the order. But Walt was expecting that plane to come.
So this would have been the follow-up to the Mickey one that was out on display at Disney's Hollywood Studios for many years.
Exactly, yeah. And so we had 4 planes over the years. There was a King Air and a Queen Air Beechcraft, and then there was the Gulfstream 1, which is Mickey Mouse 1, and then this would have been the 4th plane. So Walt was anxiously anticipating its delivery, and then it didn't happen. So we never did get that one, but he had it very proudly on his desk.
I mean, huge credit to the company and to Dave, and then obviously credit to you and your team for pulling this all back together. But and this stuff could so have easily been just created up and lost to history.
Absolutely, and they very cleverly, brought in a photographer and photographed every angle of the room, so we knew exactly the way it looked when Walt passed. So we could very, easily pull the books out and put them exactly where they belonged, and the scripts are back where they were because we could see in the pictures. And every single part of the room was photographed, and Dave did that. That was pretty special.
Obviously handled with a tremendous amount of care. These are some pretty delicate.
Oh yeah, there are
in
some
remarkable condition.
Yeah, took good care of them. They were on display down at Disneyland for a while, and then we showed them briefly in a couple traveling exhibits at the Reagan Library and at MSI. But other than that, they've been carefully tucked away for a while. One of the things I wanted to point out to you in here too that's pretty special is, you see the little mechanical bird here.
I know what this is.
Yes, that one is broken. One of the grandchildren knocked that off and broke it one time. I think Victoria knocked that off the counter. But that one doesn't work. But the one that does work is hanging up in the corner there, and that's the little bird that inspired Walt to make audio animatronics. So
purchased in New Orleans, I believe?
He bought one in New Orleans, and we think he bought one in Paris. We're not sure which is which. He always just said he bought a little bird. And we don't know which was the first one or which one he bought in which place, but it was one of these two birds that was the inspiration for audio animatronics. People ask me all the time about the books, and I think this is a fascinating thing. These are the original bookcases. We put them back in, and all of the books that are here were just as Walt left them.
Really?
So if they're leaning, it's because Walt left them leaning. And if they're upside down, it's because Walt left them that way. They're exactly the way he had them up here. And I find them fascinating because a lot of them are signed to Walt, they're inscribed. But just the choices of, what he had on his bookshelf, it's really fascinating to kind of look at it and say, okay, I understand maybe the Kodiak bear, that makes sense. Right. He made movies about bears, and then you look over at something else that doesn't seem to make so much sense, like, why are there Croatian tales or I'm trying to think of some of the very strange ones in here. There's a couple, Maury Fontaine, Scientist of the Sea, and the Birds of North America, or Birds of the Gauntlets. That would be about falconry. Some of these books are really cool. Here, this is a fun one. I'll bring this out and you can see it up close. This is Undercover Cat. This is the book that That Darn Cat was based on, written by the Gordons. And if you look inside, you can see that it was inscribed to Walt here. And it was to Walt from one smart cat to another, and his humans, Millie and the Gordons. In 1963.
I think the variety really speaks to his curiosity.
Oh,
right? So you
absolutely.
see literature and history and politics and nature, and it really runs the gamut.
And some things were obviously, I think, probably gifts from visitors who brought books. Some of them were people that he knew. There's things about Richard Nixon here. He was friends with Richard Nixon.
Salvador Dali.
The dynamic laws of healing. What was that about? Salvador Dali, exactly. And so there's fun, really interesting things. He read Kipling, so things that he based his stories on and his movies. So it's kind of cool. And so this is just a fascinating glimpse at what was, in Walt's head and what kind of things he had around him. It's kind of neat. And then over here, I get asked about this quite often. I think this is really cool. This is a Fiat. Does that look familiar to you?
It sure does. Looks like Mr. Toad's Wild Ride.
Exactly. So I don't know if he bought this when they were talking about doing Mr. Toad's or whether that was the inspiration for what ultimately became Mr. Toad's car. But one way or the other, it's an interesting little piece.
Who knew Thaddeus drove a Fiat?
Exactly. He was British. He didn't know he'd be driving an Italian car. So fun, really fun stuff. And this cabinet is really fascinating. You open it up here.
Oh my gosh.
And this was a script cabinet that he had built specifically for the scripts that he was working on at the time. So you can see there's labels. There's a new Merlin Jones. So I think this probably a sequel that they were looking at maybe doing. Family is a Menagerie. That would be My Family is a Menagerie. Nothing. Boy Called Nothing. So a lot of these were TV scripts. Some of them were features. Willie and the Yank. That one got made. So really kind of fun. John Lasseter was in here and he said, I want to look through every one of those scripts and I want to look through every one of those books and see what Walt was thinking. I I said, okay, you can come anytime you want. So now the next place that I want to take you in, this was the formal office, and this is where he did all, like I said, his big meetings and his formal occasions and formal VIP visits. But where he spent most of his time, and what to me is the Holy of Holies, is through this door.
Wow. It's amazing. You walk into a room like this and you think about the decisions made in this room and how they changed our lives and everyone's lives watching this. And
This is the room where they developed Disneyland. This is where audio animatronics were first conceived. This is where he came up with, It's a Small World, and everything was from right here. And everything from 1940 to 1966 was conceived in this room. So Disneyland, Project Florida, Mineral King, his projects that didn't happen, like the St. Louis Project and things like that, all were conceived in here. But also, the movies, this is where he worked when they were making Sleeping Beauty and Cinderella, and this was his office during World War II. So all of the World War II stuff happened in here. This is where he came up with television. This is where they discussed it, and they would sit at this table. And, there were times, the secretary said, there were times when this was wall-to-wall people, that there would be people on every chair, every couch, but there would be people on the floor. But it was the beating heart of the Walt Disney Studios. This is it. This is where he created. And I think that this has a really special aura and vibe about it. I come in here sometimes when it's completely quiet, and I feel like he just walked out of the room. And sometimes I feel like I'm intruding, like, oh dear, Walt's going to come back and catch me.
it does have that sense, like I kind of feel like I'm not supposed to be here.
Yeah, you feel like you're intruding on something, and like, he's going to, come down the hall and cough any second and walk in on us. And I get that feeling often, especially when I'm here by myself. And it's just, it's a wonderful, warm, cozy place to be. It's intimate. And it doesn't look like the office of a movie mogul.
Right.
Louis B. Mayer's office had a gigantic desk with a big spotlight on it, and it was very intimidating. And there's nothing intimidating about this office.
Right. It's strikingly approachable.
And he didn't even have a big desk in here. That's more of a table. It's more of a conference.
Yeah.
This was originally going to be a conference room. And Walt decided he wanted a more private office. And so he set it up so that they could get down to the nitty gritty in here, and they would sit around Walt's table here. And Marty Sklar told me, he said they would, move everything off of the table, and they'd lay out whatever plans they were working on. So if they had a drawing of a new attraction, or they had, scripts to go over, or they were talking storyboarding and things, they would bring in the drawings and they would lay them out on Walt's desk and discuss everything. And so that's what this area was. And then, of course, he was surrounded by just things he liked. Little things. You can see all the little pieces over there on top of the script cabinet, and things that he liked to have around him. There's the Mickey Mouse one. The plane that Walt flew over when he was doing the Project Florida research and flying over Florida, and also that's the plane that they took to the New York World's Fair in 1964-65. That plane made lots and lots of trips, and a lot of people have seen it on the backlot tour. But it's a lovely little model, and he was so proud of that. He loved his planes. And then over on the other side there, you can see the King Air. It was the predecessor to that one.
Explain the sculpture that's on the windowsill.
Oh, I believe that's a Yadro sculpture, and that's the Little Mermaid. And there's actually several Little Mermaid statues in the office. There's one over on the piano.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that, I don't know if it was a gift to him. I think one of them was a gift from Copenhagen. I don't know if he just collected them, but The Little Mermaid was something that he was very interested in. Tivoli Gardens and had been to Denmark and liked The Little Mermaid. And, of course, that he had worked on a version of Little Mermaid with Kai Nielsen, and they had intended to do a version of it earlier, back in the 30s. And that never happened, but then, of course, we did it later with Ashford and Menken.
Yeah, good idea never dies at Disney. Just
exactly. Waits for its time. But so there's a lot of really interesting little tidbits around here. Of course, little pieces from Alice in Wonderland and Animated Rose. Another Lady, there's another one there. But he loved the plane. You can see the pictures of the plane, and then he had pictures of the interior of the plane up here on the bulletin board. Bulletin board is kind of interesting. This aerial was probably, the closest I can guess on this was probably about 1965, maybe early 66, but I think 65. What he did is he would change this out. He would change the aerial out and use it during his meetings, and they would point out where they wanted to put things, and it's all color-coded, so the red things are recent, things that were recently worked on or put in, and then the yellows were coming attractions. Well, Small World was in before Walt passed away, and New Orleans Square did open. Pirates of the Caribbean hadn't opened yet, but so this is it was a little out of date even when Walt passed away. He was probably going to put up a new one soon.
And the Haunted Mansion opened, but with a diminished capacity.
Right, but it didn't open until
Future home of 1,001 ghosts. They knocked it down to 999 by the time it opened.
Well, there's always room for one more.
Right.
So this I find interesting. This is a brochure for what eventually became Cal Arts, and that's actually, but the brochure has it being located at the Golden Oak Ranch. And it ultimately got built over in Valencia, which is several miles away.
For people who don't know, the Golden Oak Ranch is still a working studio ranch. One of the last really remaining in
it's one of the few. I mean, and we do film up there still. We just put some new residential areas, and we built a new business area. And we use it all the time. And people don't know it, but they've seen commercials and TV shows and everything filmed up there. And there aren't very many movie ranches left.
That's where the Golden Oak development at Walt Disney World got its name.
Exactly, and the Golden Oak is where gold was first discovered in California. So right there in that spot. And it wasn't actually discovered at Sutter's Mill. It was discovered first at the Golden Oak Ranch.
Didn't know that.
So let's take a closer look at the desk over here, because there's some really interesting stuff over here. So this is exactly what was on the desk when Walt passed away. And Dave came in and inventoried everything in here, like he said, down to the last paper clip. So those are the paper clips. His little red grease pencil and, letter opener and things like that, magnifying glass. This is his Rolodex. And it says right there, Sherman Boys. So he really did call them the boys.
Wow.
All the time. So Harry Title, Don Tatum, Marty Sklar. So he would change, he'd close it, and then he would open it up to D. So there's Mark Davis, Don DeGrody, Roy Disney.
It's amazing seeing the personal extension phone numbers of so many people whose hands are now in bronze here on the slide.
In Legends Plaza.
Crazy.
Pretty sure it'd be interesting to match them up and see how many of them were actually in there.
Tag the plaques with their phone numbers.
Isn't that fun?
See a production budget?
Yeah, this is a production budget for Blackbeard's Ghost, which was in production at the time Walt passed on. And then down here is his briefcase.
Apparently did some international traveling recently. There's still the residue of a U.S. Customs.
The interesting thing too, I have a Dave Smith story to tell you about this. It used to be that telephones belonged to the telephone company. They didn't belong to you.
Oh, I know that.
You didn't buy a phone. That you just kind of rented one from the phone company. And if you moved and left, you gave it back. Well, this is Walt Disney's telephone. This is Walt's phone. So when they started taking everything out of these offices, the telephone company was going to come and pick up the phones, and Dave cut the cord and hid them.
Again, credit to Dave.
So these are the real deal. So that's the phone that Walt talked to people on.
Wow.
And the same with the one in the formal office. So Dave snipped them and hid them. So they couldn't find them when the phone company came to pick them up.
Funny.
There's one other very special thing in this office that I want to share with you, and this is also something that people that saw this office on display down at Disneyland never actually saw. So this is pretty special. back here behind this light, there is a little push button, and when you push it,
Wow. It's like Tomorrowland.
it is indeed. That's Walt's kitchen. If I go through here, and for me, this is one of the most fun things about this office. Of course, you know, you've got Walt's stove here, an electric stove. But what's really cool are these cupboards, because they were built by General Electric. And so if you look in here, you can see the GE logo, and they light up when you open it. They've always done it. Exactly. And so not all of them light up, but this one does, and this one. You can have Spam or chili or frozen vegetables or Jell-O. Pretty much it.
You know what's cool? That we were talking out there about how the office isn't pretentious and it's not showy and it's warm. And once again, that supports that, right? Just
absolutely.
Even Walt Disney, at his stature, regular guy.
Oh, he had very plain tastes. He liked stew and chili and red Jell-O and that kind of thing. He really did. And these are the kind of things that were kept in here, because if he didn't get lunch, like I said, sometimes he was so busy, he wasn't able to. And so he'd come in here himself and make himself a pot of chili on the stove.
To say thank you seems like too little. I mean, obviously you were the very first person I ever met in this company, and you've opened a lot of doors in my career, but opening these doors and letting me in this space is something that you saw my reaction. I didn't expect to have that level of reaction, but this has just been one of those unbelievable days. So I feel like we should sit and have a bowl of chili in Walt's honor.
Oh, well, there you go. I could make some in here, but I think it probably would be better if we went over to the commissary and had a bowl, because they still serve Walt's.
Do they really?
Every day.
Tell you what, it's on me.
Okay, you got a deal.
All right.
Well, my friend, here's to a great day on the lot.
And to Walt.